Welcome to video number 14 for Control-Shift-Enter Mastering Excel Array Formulas. Hey, we're in the workbook Array Formula DVD book start on the sheet topics. Hey, through the first 13 videos, we've talked a lot about array formulas, and occasionally we've talked about Boolean logic. So in this video, we want to formally talk about Boolean logic, and specifically about and or criteria. And we'll even, at the end of the video, talk about converting trues and falses to ones and zeros. Now I'm going to click on the link to jump to sheet number 14. Here's sheet 14, and as I have been doing in the last few videos, here is a list of all the important topics in the first 13 videos. All right, so we want to talk about Boolean logic or Boolean math or Boolean calculations in Excel. We're going to talk about and criteria, which we actually have already talked a lot about, and about or criteria. We'll mention not criteria, and we might even mention XOR criteria. Let's start with and criteria. Now, and just means you're going to have more than one logical test. And we've already seen COUNTIFS and SUMIFS and SUMPRODUCT. All of those were and criteria calculations. Now, if we're going to direct, we could use like the and function. And then we could just put the logical tests into our and function. And only when they all came out true will and deliver a true. But that and function, and there's also an or function. Those functions aren't too useful in array formulas lots of times. So we have to do direct Boolean calculations. So here's how it goes. We have two logical tests. And if they both come out true, we're going to end up with the true. For and criteria, since all of the logical tests have to come out true, anytime you get a false or both falses, the end result is going to be a false. All right, so and criteria is multiplying. Or criteria, we're going to use adding. So if we have two logical tests and they both come out true, we could get a 2. We also could get a false, which means we get a 1. A false here to start it off, so we get a 0 plus a 1. All three of those cases are trues. It's only when we get false, false that we end up with a false. Right? So or criteria, at least one of the logical tests have to come out true for the final answer to be true. All right, so we want to go see some calculating. We're going to start off with and we're going to start off with two logical tests. Now I'm going to show you the and function just to show you that it is here and it does work. I'm going to ask relative cell reference, are you equal to the west? That's our criteria, F4. And then you comma to get to the second logical test. And I'm going to say, hey, the sales, are you greater than or equal to that hurdle? And I'm going to hit the F4 key. Right? So Control Enter and copy it down. It's only when we get west greater than or equal to 5, west greater than or equal to 5 that we get two trues. You have to have two trues in order for the and to deliver a true when there's two logical tests. Now, what about doing a direct Boolean calculation? And these direct Boolean calculations for and for or criteria are going to be important in a lot of array formulas. All right, so I'm going to say equal and get rid of that comma and put a multiplication symbol. Now, multiplying means and. That means they both have to come out true in order for the final answer to be true. Now, when we're doing this calculation, is this going to work? No, it's not. We saw back in video number 1, the order of operations in Excel. Comparative operators happen way at the bottom of the list, and multiplying happens first. But we need a true and a true first, so we have to force the comparative operators to calculate before that multiplication symbol. Very important in a lot of our bigger array formulas to make sure we have all of our parentheses in the correct place. Now, Control Enter, double click and send it down. So we're not going to get trues and falses. We're going to get ones and zeros. Now let's run Formula Evaluator on this cell. I'm going to Alt-MV and hit Enter or click that Evaluate button. Enter, Enter. So west equals west, and 7 is greater than or equal to 5. So we get two trues. Now remember, any math operation on a true or false will convert it to a 1 or a 0. In our case, because both conditions are met, we get a 1. So and criteria. Now, let's think about what we've already done so far in terms of Boolean and criteria. SUMPRODUCT can do and criteria. Hey, this looks familiar. We've done this before. Notice that if I highlight the insides of the parentheses there, that's a comparative operator. It's an array calculation. It'll deliver trues and falses when I hit that F9 key. Now, the double negative will convert it to ones and zeros, but let's just take a look here. So I hit F9 on the insides of those parentheses. So this is classical and criteria array calculation. False times false is going to give us a false. True times false. False times true. It's only when we get the true times true and true times true. So it's two trues in a row. And notice, what is it doing? The product part of SUMPRODUCT is what multiplies. Now I'm going to click Escape and just explicitly show you. Now I can highlight these arguments here. F9. Click the array to F9. Now you can see it's only when we get that 1 times a 1, 1 times a 1, that SUMPRODUCT can then add it. SUMPRODUCT does and criteria. Not only that, if we had 2007 or later, we'd be using COUNTIFS, not SUMPRODUCT for this particular calculation here, right? COUNTIFS, it's doing and. It's only when it gets true, true does it count that record. SUMIFS, only when it gets a true and a true does it add that. So it's going to add these two numbers and get 12. So SUMIFS is doing and criteria. So is AVERAGEIFS. It's going to take those two numbers and take the average. And now MAXIF, well, we don't have a MAXIF, but we can string two if functions together. And this is and criteria. Now if I were to click on this and hit the F9, only when it went through here and it gets true, true, is it going to take a number, which is from this column right here. And so when I hit the F9 key, only when we got true, true do we get the 7 and 5. And those 7 and 5s are then allowed to be dumped into the max function. So the point here is when you string two ifs together, that's and criteria. It's important here because in some of our large formulas, like for data extraction, we're going to string a bunch of if functions together. And that is and criteria. It means all of the conditions have to be met for us to get the thing in the value of true. So true times true puts that 7 into the max function. True times true puts that 5 into the max calculation. All right, so that was and with two logical tests. Can we do two or more? Absolutely. Now here's a little data set, and we have 3 criteria. So let's do Boolean and. It's multiplying, so I string my logical tests together in parentheses, right? Is that cell equal to this criteria F4? Is that relative cell reference equal to our criteria F4? Only when it gets true, 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 all multiplied together, we'll get a 1. Will it mean that all the conditions are met? So right there, that's the only one that's met. And later, we'll not do so much single cell and criteria Boolean calculations, but we'll do array calculations, where this is an array of trues and falses times an array of trues and falses times an array of true and falses. Or we may do string 3 ifs together also. Now let's talk about or. Now you have to be careful with or. Sometimes it's OK to get a 2 for answer. Sometimes it's not. Now let's look at this data set. Our criteria is going to be West, and our sales is going to be greater than or equal to. All right. So let's look at the or function. The or function. We'll string our 2 tests. I'm going to say, hey, are you equal to our region, F4? And then I'm going to put a comma, right? Relative cell reference, are you greater than or equal to our hurdle, F4? All right, so I have my 2 logical tests. At least one of these. It could be one, it could be the other, or both. And we could see here's one or the other, one or the other. There's both. Both of these are true, true. the OR function delivers a true. Now let's do that explicitly with an Boolean OR calculation. Remember, it's adding, so equals, and I'm going to put a plus here. But don't forget, comparative operators happen below any math operation. So if we want those to happen first, we have to put parentheses. Control Enter, double click and send it down. If I click right here and Alt MV, I can watch my OR. Hey, there's a true. There's a true, and when I add them, it's gonna be 2. All right, now again, sometimes that'll cause problems, sometimes it won't. Coming up, we will look at that in great detail. Now, there is an XOR calculation, and that is when only one of the logical tests can be true. These 2's should be excluded. All right, so let's see how we could do that. Now, actually, in 2013, which I'm not using here, there's a new function called XOR, which is great. But let's see if we can amend this using our formula smarts here. Well, I'm getting 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2. And I really only want it when it's a 1. So couldn't I just take this formula and say, hey, whenever you're equal to 1, we're on the right path here. But we got to remember, comparative operator, math operator. I need to force that operator to happen first. So I have to put parentheses around that plus. Now it will work. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Now it gives me true, true only when one of them come out true. Now we could do another calculation to turn it to a 0 and a 1 if we wanted, but we're not going to. Now, very important when we're starting to talk about OR. When the result can be 2 or more. Sometimes it'll be fine, sometimes it won't. Now, counting formulas will have trouble. But the if logical test argument has no problem because it interprets any non-zero number as true. So 2 or 1, they'll both be interpreted as true. So let's look at examples of both. A counting formula where we get in trouble, and then the if. All right, here's our data set, city, product. And I want to say, hey, are any of these transactions equal to Seattle or equal to product? Now, there's not a built-in function. You remember COUNTIFS with an S? That's for one or more criteria, but it does AND criteria. No problem. We can use the SUMPRODUCT. We can build an explicit OR Boolean calculation in our array and only use a single array. When you use a single array, then the product doesn't come into play. The SUMPRODUCT only does the summing. Now, why are we using the SUMPRODUCT? Because that argument there can handle our array calculation. So now I'm going to explicitly say, hey, is anything in that column equal to our criteria? And then close parentheses, plus, open parentheses, anything in this column equal to our second criteria. Now, we already know there's going to be a problem, right? Because we're going to get Seattle. The very first true here will be, the very first question here will be true, and the very first answer in this array calculation will be true. I'm just going to hit Enter. 4. Well, I can clearly see if it's an OR, the transaction's going to be counted if it's Seattle or product. Well, that one's counted. Product 2 there is going to be counted, and Seattle there is going to be counted. Whoa, it's overcounting. And that's the trouble you get when you're doing OR inside the SUMPRODUCT. No problem. Let's just explicitly see that this does come out F9. There's that too, right? So if we look at this, is there something we can do to it to correct the count? Well, yeah, notice anytime there's a number greater than 0, then we know that should be counted. By the way, I made a post years back at the Mr. Excel message board, answered someone's post, and made this Boolean OR criteria mistake. And then Barry Houdini came along and said something like, well, you probably need to do this. We need to make that plus calculate before our comparative operator. So I'm going to put parentheses around it and just ask the question, hey, is anything in there greater than 0? Now, when I hit Enter, it's going to get a 0 because why? Well, the inside of that is giving us what we want. F9, true, true, true. There's 3 trues. But of course, SUMPRODUCT doesn't understand trues and falses. So we have to make a further calculation, some math operation on this. And I'm going to use double negative because it's, in most cases, the most efficient. Now notice, math operation, comparative operator, so we have to add yet another level of parentheses. And that will work. That's or counting. Just remember, when you have the possibility of getting something greater than 1, then you need to do some logical test so we don't overcount. Oh, actually, I'm going to copy this here. I meant to keep this here for your reference. So I'm going to just delete that. All right, so there's our original calculation. All right, so that is the correct calculation. Now, just a word of warning here. If you have the possibility of a number greater than 1, then you can't use 2 COUNTIFs. Now, later we'll talk about when you can use 2 COUNTIFs. Because COUNTIFs, if you're never going to get 2 trues, then you can string 2 COUNTIFs. And we'll see an example of that later. But that won't work here. That gives me the incorrect count of 4. Now, what would we do if we wanted to sum the numbers with this OR criteria? Well, we'd simply take our correct formula, copy it, and add. Now we have trues and falses. We're only using a single array. But once we get, I'm sorry, we don't have trues and falses because we did the double negative. Now we have F9, properly 0s and 1s. So we can simply, for adding, if you have OR criteria and you need to add, now you can add comma, a second array. OK, so got it? Once we have simply 0s and 1s in one of the arrays, now we can multiply. All right, so 16, and we can see that that is this one and this one. All right, now there's a bunch of notes here because that's an important one. Let's talk about the if function. Now, we saw how counting with OR criteria, when you can get a count of more than 1, that causes trouble. But now let's look at the if. Equals, and I want to run the max calculation. And I want to find if the city is Seattle or product 2. And then take all those numbers and find the max. One if here. Remember, earlier with AND criteria, we strung the 2 ifs together. But guess what? In the logical test argument, we can do our array calculation, Boolean OR with a plus. And then it doesn't matter. If the if function logical test sees a 1 or a 2 or any non-zero number, it'll work fine. So watch this. I'm simply going to say, anything in there equal to Seattle, close parentheses, plus, open parentheses, anything in there equal to product 2. And you know what? I can take this and highlight it in F9 and already see there's a 2 there, but no problem. The 2s and the 1s are all trues to the if function. Control Z. And now, comma, well, it's the numbers I want to put in there. And the values of true, those are the numbers. And then the value of false, I leave it off. Remember, if we leave that out, it puts falses in a max. We'll ignore those falses. All right, I'm going to hit the F9 key. Beautiful. Now it puts just a 7, 6, and 3 into the max function. Control Z. And this is an array calculation, right? Anytime you have a calculation, an array calculation, it's going to require Control-Shift-Enter no matter what. All right, so the if function, if you have just your Boolean adding in a single logical test, it's going to have no problem with that. If you are counting for OR, remember, if you have 2s, you have to do something to it to make sure it doesn't overcount. All right, let's scroll down here. Now, in regards to this calculation here, notice we did the max if with the Boolean OR. There is a way to do this, Seattle or product 2 with the DMAX, but it's usually too complicated. right? So we always want to ask the question when we're looking at array formulas, is there a better way to do it? Because array formulas can get big and take a long time to calculate. And here's what you'd have to do. You literally have to list every possibility. Notice in and for DMAX, for the D functions, and for advanced filter, or criteria is listed on different rows, right? So you literally have to list every possibility here. So usually, I don't want to bother with that, especially if there's, like 3 or 4 ors that you have going on there. All right, and we're going to scroll down. Now, in some cases, like we have an or criteria we want to run, but there's never a chance of getting a 2. Now, we have 2 criteria, and this is, are any of these equal to Seattle or Burien? You see, the question's going to be asked of a single cell. Are you equal to Seattle or are you equal to Burien? And each one of these cells cannot be both equal to Seattle and equal to Burien. So we're never getting a 2. All right? So in this case, if we were doing our explicit Boolean calculation, we could just go ahead and notice to do it this way helps us see how it's working. We're asking the 2 different questions of the same cell. And since they'll never both be Seattle and Burien, we're never going to have a problem. And that's important because when you have that situation, you can do a few things. You can do 2 COUNTIF functions. Or even if there's more than 1 criteria, you could use COUNTIFs and have the 2 criterias in it and 2 criterias in this one. As long as there's never a chance of double counting, right, then you can use this method. Right? You could also use DCOUNTA, right? See, I wanted to count cities, so I use COUNTA. And DCOUNTA, because it's easy, you just list the criteria directly below it. This one probably wouldn't want to do in this circumstance because 2 COUNTIFs is much better. However, we will have to string, as we saw for the if function and some of our later data extraction functions, we will have to string together this or Boolean or criteria. There's still a third way we could do this. The match. Now, remember, for a match function, the lookup value is expecting a single value. Here, we're giving it more than 1 value. But check this out. We are using the lookup array, just these 2 values. And what does the match function do? It tells you the relative position. So really, the match is going to deliver an array of not available or the position 1 or the position 2. Now, the advantage to the match, this construction here, is that if you have a lot of or criteria, and later for our data extraction formulas, we will have, or you may have, a lot of criteria. It's much easier to create this type of formula than it is to string together a bunch of pluses with array calculations. Now, we want to talk about converting trues and falses to 1s and 0s. We mentioned that any math operation, and we've seen a lot throughout this video series so far, but you can use double negative plus 0 times 1 divided by 1 exponent 1. And all I did here is I have some trues and falses, and I went ahead and just proved that whatever math operation it is you're doing, it'll do that. Now, what we want to do here, and we've seen a bunch already, and we'll see a bunch more moving forward. But now what we want to do is we want to time the different ways to convert trues and falses to 1s and 0s. And I have done this in videos at YouTube before, and many other people have done this and come up with similar conclusions. But let's go look at the workbook, Converting Trues and Falses to 1s and 0s. Ctrl-O, and it's in the timing formulas folder, and you can find it. Let's see, where is it? Right there. Converting trues and falses to 1s and 0s. And I can't remember how big this data set is. It's 250,000 rows of data. And we have double negatives in SUMPRODUCT. So we're trying to add with mismatched criteria here. And then multiplying inside the sum function and Control-Shift-Enter. And then sum if with the multiplying done right inside the logical test. And then we have sum product, and I'm dividing by 1. Sum product plus 0. Sum product actually multiplying the arrays directly inside of the sum product. We saw a great trick for that. If the dimensions of the arrays are not the same, then multiplying will get over that. And then times 1. This is inside the sum with multiple ifs. So this one compares, I think, to, notice up here we did one if with Boolean. So there's all these different ways we can do it. There's stringing a bunch of ifs inside the sum, and then Control-Shift-Enter. And then finally exponent. And here are the timing results. I timed them a bunch of times. And sure enough, it looks like the double negative comes out on top. So I'm going to close this. So here you can take a look through here. There are the results. And again, we've talked about this many times before. Timing formula depends on your exact functions and how you constructed your formulas and your computer and all that. So if you're concerned about calculating time, you want to time your own formulas in. Man, Excel MVP Charles Williams has an amazing website. And here's code both for 2007 and 10. These are basically the same articles with a few differences. But just amazing article about how to speed up your spreadsheets. So double negatives, pretty darn good. All right, and then finally, here's kind of our collection. 21 of and or criteria guidelines, and double negatives and some codes. All right, so that video just is a little bit about Boolean math, doing and or calculations. In our next video, 15, we'll summarize a set of array formula rules. And then in 16, we have a great video about data extraction formulas, which starts to get off into some big, huge array formulas. And we'll use a lot of this Boolean stuff. All right, we'll see you next video.